Hi, I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avocet Communications and host of StrategyCast. Join me and my guests, innovators, disruptors, and visionaries, as we explore bold and brave marketing strategies that help you transform, scale, and grow your brand. My guest today is Anastasia Kārkliņa Gabriel, a senior global insights lead at Reddit and author of Cultural Intelligence for Marketers. Anastasia is here to help you evolve your marketing strategies by tapping into cultural trends and emotional registers. She'll share examples of Lyft's Women's Plus initiative and how brands can navigate the complex cultural landscape. If you're ready to build a culturally intelligent marketing strategy that stands out and connects deeply with your audience, this episode is for you. And don't forget to check out the most recent issue of the StrategyCast newsletter on StrategyCast.com. Just like this episode is full of inspiration and a ton of ideas that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.
A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. StrategyCast is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Welcome to StrategyCast. I am so excited and absolutely thrilled to have Anastasia Kārkliņa Gabriel join the show today. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here, Lori. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, I am too. So Anastasia has an incredible book out right now, which looks backwards to all of you guys right now. But it is called Cultural Intelligence for Marketers, Building an Inclusive Marketing Strategy. We're going to dive into that today and really honing in on, brands and how they reflect and actively shape the culture within the organization with the outside world. Before we get there, such an amazing background. Tell us all about it.
Thank you so much, Lori. Happy to have a chat today. Was looking forward to it as we were planning this conversation. So as you mentioned, I have this book out, which is really building upon my background as an academic and researcher. Currently, I sit in the insights function at Reddit. I'm a senior global insights lead at Reddit. But before my pivot into marketing, I trained classically as a cultural theorist, and I completed my PhD at Duke University in cultural studies with a focus on questions of race, gender, sexuality, and really understanding the role of identity and society and culture and cultures of belonging, really, that we are building, as you mentioned, within organizations, but also within society writ large. And so now I bring my expertise and my skill set to cultural strategy and cultural insights in helping brands understand their audiences, understand the conversations they're having, and really contextualizing those things within the larger culture and trends, and helping our clients maximize on that knowledge to harness it for the benefit of the business, but also for the benefit of society at large.
So where are marketers missing the boat right now? And how can this theory, these ideologies, these strategies that you really talk about in the book help them market better, communicate better?
That's such an important question to ask, because I think we are in this pivotal moment within, culture more broadly. We see a lot of fragmentation, polarization happening, a lot of debates emerging, and we would be mistaken not to think that that's not affecting marketing, our profession, our industry. We see that in a way that currently there are so many heated debates about the future of purpose, whether purpose-driven marketing is even relevant. How can brands show up in culture without causing backlash, without harming their business? And the book is really perhaps an answer to what not necessarily an alternative to purpose might be, but how business can navigate this particular landscape. And I talk a lot about how every brand out there, every brand-driven business is implicated in culture just by virtue of going to market with messaging and communications that are disseminated at scale and reach a lot of people that, our job is to move and shape their behaviors, perceptions, and their purchases. And with that in mind, no brand can really escape being part of culture. And so there's such a spectrum of possibilities for brands to be engaged in culture in a way that makes sense for their product, their category, and their business that is not just limited to purpose or purpose-driven marketing. And so the book really tries to expand that conversation to talk about culturally intelligent marketing.
And I must admit, I don't hear this a lot. But for the naysayers who are listening right now, and I think it's a small percentage, maybe 10 or 15%, why is understanding the cultural relevance of your buyers important?
Yeah, there is a small, I think, small slice of the marketing community, right, that is advocating for a return to, profit, business, commercial focus for brands. And to the point of where I actually read a LinkedIn comment this morning that said, culture is irrelevant in commercial space, right? And culture is irrelevant to business, and we should get rid ourselves of that word completely. Having written a book on culture and brands and culturally intelligent marketing, I, of course, strongly disagreed. And so why is that? The reason is that, at the very least, that brands are operating in a competitive marketplace. We are in a highly media saturated landscape where we know we have to fight to secure a attention of our customers. And in this day and age, a customer has 5, 10, 20 other product options that they can turn to. And so, what I talk to and a lot of my colleagues talk about is the importance of understanding culture to understand how to tap into emotional registers, values, stories that are culturally relevant in the moment and that get that attention. And so any brand-driven business that wants to survive in this kind of saturated landscape, I think, should be, at the very least, paying attention to what's happening in culture and how to maintain relevance by really understanding how to navigate it, this kind of climate and stand out in a meaningful way.
Yeah. We've always said and firmly believe that all things being equal with a brand and their competition, this is the sort of thing that can really catapult them beyond. And from a community standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, internal and external, to really create meaning behind the product that it is that they're marketing and selling. And that is where they rise above that sea of sameness, because as many people, as many brands out there, just, they're not taking it as seriously as they should.
Absolutely, Lori. And I'm afraid, or what worries me greatly, being part of marketing community and the industry conversations, is that, we are attracted to kind of buzzwords that we hear. So, for example, in this moment, we hear a lot about culture wars. And so we are, I believe, getting stuck in a kind of binary thinking, right? Where we are like, well, we are in this moment of so-called culture wars, the term that I fundamentally disagree with, but that's something that we hear a lot in industry conversation, trend reports, and so on. And it really locks us into this kind of limited thinking when we think about profit versus purpose, multicultural, diverse community versus mainstream, a binary that no longer actually makes sense and is quite outdated. And we think about activist brands and regular brands. We think about speaking up or staying silent, and I worry that it limits us to all the very different other ways that brands can engage cultural communities and can show up in culture that show up in culture in a way that is meaningful to customers, culturally relevant, but is not necessarily purpose-driven per se. Like, there's so many other spectrum of possibilities that brands could be exploring to maintain relevance, to drive commercial advantage, and to positively influence their customer base.
And the marketer, the CMO, is the one who's in the tough position, right? Because he or she knows that this cultural intelligence can really impact the bottom line But in a lot of situations, the CEO, the board of directors who are pushing the revenue generation and only caring about the EBITDA and the bottom line are causing that marketer to make a difficult choice between what do I do here? From the standpoint of building something from the ground up that's relevant to the culture, which is going to take longer than just getting a new campaign out. So, as important as this is to the authenticity of a brand and creating trust with a brand, the patience regarding the time involved and really the parallel paths that it takes to get the messaging out there to sell and create brand is, it's just they lose sight of the need for time. And that's why so many CMOs are, lasting 2 years, 3 years at the helm now.
Right. And that's why I talk quite a bit about the importance of over time integrating insights function into the marketing processes and the marketing organization at large, because it is difficult to do good work within this kind of contentious, uncertain landscape where, let's be real, brands do make mistakes. It's difficult to do that without data, without research that really enables marketing teams to make smart decisions for the business. And so it seems to me that that's something that organizations should be focusing on in the long term. And I am more interested in kind of how do we restructure organizations, our cultures internally, to be a little bit more attuned to insights, to data-driven decision-making, and also to our own biases and how, unfortunately, reality is that our own biases and gaps in awareness can actually creep in to those marketing campaigns. So how are we creating opportunities for cultural literacy within our organizations where marketers are empowered to gain new skills, new knowledge, and have resources to adapt to this new landscape. And so the book is an offering to my colleagues in that sense of hoping to give a little bit more support to marketers who are wondering, how do I navigate this landscape in this day and age?
Well, there's so much value there. And in the book, you talk about the need to really understand the cultural norms, the values, the beliefs, and the behaviors. You and I know the impact that makes from a strategy standpoint, from a messaging standpoint, from a differentiation standpoint, from a distinction standpoint, and ultimately revenue standpoint. Provide us some insights for each one of those, if you would.
Yeah, I think it's so important for marketers, creatives to really start thinking about the importance of understanding culture as the brand evolves, right? We, just to break it down very simply, we see, for instance, brands like Victoria's Secret or the deodorant brand Axe that were highly popular and really part of the cultural common sense, so to say, just 10 years ago. And they were tapping, for instance, into these stories and narratives of masculinity and desire or femininity and attraction and beauty, of course, right? And so we know that the marketing and advertising of those brands shaped the perception of people, of young girls and women, et cetera. So it did have a cultural effect on the kind of representation that we saw in mass media. But also those brands have had to change. If you look at the marketing communications of Victoria's Secret or Axe, they have had to really catch up with time as cultural norms and behaviors and expectations around how we represent what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman changed with cultural movements for better inclusivity, for body positivity, for radical acceptance, etc. And so, I think these are good examples of the very fact that culture evolves and brands that want to succeed in the future have to keep an eye on where culture is headed. And so one may argue that a brand like Victoria's Secret has been surpassed by Fenty, for example, and Rihanna's brand of lingerie, that were feeling a need that Victoria's Secret was kind of behind on and has had to since catch up. So, of course, in understanding culture, there are such huge commercial implications for revenue, brand health, and the long-term ability of the brand to stay top of mind.
Why do you think it was so hard for a brand like Victoria's Secret to change the cultural context and adapt to the change in the market?
That's an interesting question. I've spent quite some time thinking about, what they're doing recently, which I find interesting, right? There has been a lot of conversation about them embracing inclusivity, and then kind of pedaling back. There were some headlines, not sure how accurate they are, that suggested there were some reports of the brand deciding to pull back on inclusivity because they didn't see as much of commercial impact as they had hoped. And in my interpretation, the cause of that is really that the brand was scrambling to keep up with others. And it didn't seem as authentic as it could have been. It didn't seem as rooted in brand's identity, which happens with a lot of heritage brands as well that are trying to keep up and evolve. And, in my mind, to me, it's that's why I am a huge proponent of arguing for inclusive marketing and more culturally intelligent marketing to be adapted in the context of the category, in the context of the brand, its history, et cetera, so that inclusive marketing can feel organic and feel more authentic and feel more like a fit to the brand. And I think what happened was that we saw brands like that struggling to keep up, but not necessarily figuring out what is their role within this larger culture conversation. Is it at all relevant to them? And if so, what is their unique way of showing up within that conversation?
To me, it's like a reality check, right? If you take a look at your audience and the buyers of your product and what you're portraying through imagery doesn't match that buyer persona and several of them, that you've got to change. You've got to adapt to the buyer. Take a look. We're just going to stay on retail fashion brands for a minute. If you take a look at J. Crew and take a look at what they've adapted, how they've adapted their visual storytelling with the multitude of sizes of women and men that they deliver product to, their visual storytelling now completely matches that. And to me, it's so basic. It's such a baby step, right? When it comes to that inclusivity that you're talking to, the cultural norms that you're talking to, the context in which the audience lives and breathes day in and day out. And something as simple as visual storytelling goes a long way to help people feel that they can be a part of the brand versus Victoria's Secret. I'm sorry, that's just not how I'm going to look in that piece of lingerie. That to me is just such a basic point to be made here.
And especially so important, we talk about consumer skepticism. That's just a reality. And to your point, the fact that consumers can sense when something is done just to appear cool, appear on trend, versus something that is rooted in, deep human and cultural insight about the role that the brand plays in the category and within a customer experience and customer journey. And we can talk about all the other successful examples that I think where brands are really shifting away from performativity in marketing, and specifically within inclusive marketing or marketing that really attempts to tap into cultural movements and trends, and the kind of marketing and innovation that is really about understanding the consumer and understanding the role that these questions of identity play, not just in a society at large, but how they shape the customer's experience with the brand, with the category in this particular vertical, in their shopping experience, et cetera.
And in the book, you talk about CQ, which you'll explain in just a minute here, and that skill that really allows businesses to dive deep into a lot of what you're talking about and really globalize around the world. Talk to us about that skill and how people can begin to really beef it up.
So I talk about cultural intelligence as what I see the future of what we might call culturally fluent marketing. So the ability of brands to show up in culture in a way that's relevant, in a way that's impactful and meaningful, commercially and culturally. And I talk about cultural intelligence as one of the terms that kind of been gaining attention and traction within the marketing circles, although originally it comes from the field of cross-cultural management studies. And so in the book, I take the term from the field of cross-cultural management studies and say, well, how can we adapt this term to actually fit the marketing context? Because in my research and the literature review that I did for the book, I realized, well, marketers are using that term, but the definition is kind of murky. We're not really sure what we talk about when we talk about cultural intelligence in the context of brands. And so I define it as the ongoing practice of tracking and analyzing cultural trends, movements, and forces in order to understand their commercial implications and produce strategies that can harness that knowledge to benefit the business and also do good in the world. And the reason I focus on the do good in the world part is because from my perspective, as I mentioned before, all brands are implicated in culture simply by putting out mass media in front of consumers and representing social life, representing beauty, representing gender relations, representing what families look like, and so on and so forth. And so it seems to me that, from the perspective of strategy within this particular environment, it becomes more and more important for a modern day marketer to understand the role of brand and culture and how to harness that knowledge to make smart decisions within marketing strategy, but also business strategy more broadly.
Right. It's interesting if you think about brands that are looking, internal to begin with at their customer base and doing an analysis on the cultural intelligence, of the different contexts that they might uncover along the way, and then determining if that is scalable or if they need to really take a look at some outside segmentation to determine if they need to even augment that internal, that current audience that they have right now. How often do you see brands truly needing to pivot the path they're going on and maybe abandoning some of the customer base to get to where they know they need to go?
That's a good question. I'll have to think about that. But what comes to mind when I hear you talk about it is just the overall need for all brands to um, shift and evolve our understanding of audiences, right? Historically, we have focused on multicultural marketing, right? So we would consider, well, this is our customer base, but we want to market and focus our attention on the quote unquote Black consumer or the Hispanic consumer or the LGBTQ community. And to me, that sort of approach to understanding audiences is becoming increasingly outdated. In fact, I was just reading research a few weeks ago that suggested that more than one in two, so it was 57% of mainstream consumers all across the board say that their preference and their purchases of brands are highly influenced by the taste and preferences of diverse and multicultural communities, right? And we see that in the way that Black American culture historically has shaped mainstream culture, in the way that music and entertainment is influenced by a variety of culture that have historically not been part of the mainstream or centered in the marketing processes. And so it seems to me that we need to evolve how we understand our audiences and who we serve. And increasingly, I find in the work with clients, but also in the conversation with my colleagues who are marketing leaders, that there's a greater desire to understand the customer base through the perspective of their passions, their interests, their values, their psychographics, etc., rather than the kind of binary approach, which talks about the mainstream core market versus multicultural market, for example. So that's really top of mind for me these days.
Yeah, and it's interesting if you take a global brand like Nike and take a look at the different contexts of audiences and then behaviors within those audiences, and then you add in the timestamp of where they were in the 70s, maybe 80s, and where they are now, and the shift that has taken place, it's a very, very difficult marketing problem to solve. because you've got this very global approach, or let's just talk about the US for right now, for marketing. That's got to be, provide air cover, very high level awareness, and then really we're segmenting, underneath that. And you take a look at the product and how each, take a look at Air Jordan and how that really is adaptable to a very, very specific segment of the culture and the audience. It's not an easy marketing problem to solve. It's difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I think the kind of terminology I really start to use more often now is this idea of cultural communities, right? And how cultural communities adapt products, right? And kind of bring them part of their own identity. And my colleague, Marcus Collins, who wrote the foreword to my book, has his own book released last year called For the Culture, which really talks about subcultures and different cultural communities that form their own segments and the way that brands get adopted within this kind of as almost kind of cultural artifacts, right? In the way that we express ourselves, the way that we find belonging, etc. And so Dr. Collins's work is just also so important for helping us understand how to really navigate these really tough questions in this landscape where we are seeing brands in some ways, from my perspective now, not just be part of business and commerce, right, but really influence culture and media and entertainment and so on. And so there are just so many variables at play in really understanding the cultural relevance of brands or how really to navigate that in light of business decisions that marketing leaders have to make.
We're talking today about a lot of large brands, and our listeners are a lot of brands that are scaling, they're growing. They might be going after, $100 million tranche of investment, or they might be, having a large IPO. Nonetheless, they don't have the recognition that a Victoria's Secret or a Nike has yet, and they're not as large. What advice do you have to the communications directors, CMOs at these companies about what is the best way to start?
Mhm. This is one of my favorite questions. And in fact, in the book, I try to balance between talking about, the Patagonias and Ben and Jerry's of the world, and also some of the examples of less known brands that are doing really innovative work. And one of my favorite examples, we're talking about startups or smaller businesses and less known brands, is the example of Billy, which is now a well-known shaving brand, and you can find them at Target and whatnot. But they started in 2018 as a startup, right? As just a woman, female founders who had an idea about what was missing in the market. And, for those who don't know much about Billy, they are essentially started a direct-to-consumer brand, and they offered shaving products, so razors, but they did so in a way that was unseen in their category before. So they were the first to start showing more authentic, real images and stories of women shaving. And it's totally wild for me to think that, say, even 5 to 7 years ago, it was almost a scandal to show a woman shaving body hair, shaving her armpits or shaving her legs, because prior to that, we saw images of women shaving already shaven legs. Like, it's so ridiculous in this moment. And so at that point, when they were just starting the brand, they really took the time to understand their consumer and understand their category and understand that emotional void that a lot of female consumers had that wasn't filled by brands. We were watching ads that didn't really represent our experience. And so for smaller brands, I wouldn't discount their role in transforming the category. And an example of Billy is a testament of that. So all that is to say that for leaders who are part of smaller businesses, I think there just is something so powerful about really understanding their customer and investing in the good old consumer and market research through this kind of lens of culture, inclusivity, and thinking about what's on the horizon. So to me, no brand can go wrong with thinking about what's missing, what's being overlooked? And so that's, to me, is one of the most important questions that a brand can ask.
And it doesn't happen without studying the market and studying the behavior of the audience. And quite frankly, in the situation with Billy's, taking a very, very bold approach to not just differentiation, but distinction, and how they show usage of the product so that they can rise above the norm that the industry and the Goliaths of industry have formulated over the last many, many decades on how, what the go-to market strategy is for razors. I mean, and, that breakout approach is exactly what the nimble entrepreneurial founder mentality, disruptor mentality offers so many different brands and the industry right now. I love that example. And it's seemingly so simple, but it took a lot of strategy to get there. It took a lot of boldness to get there. It took a lot of guts to say, we've got to do it different.
Right. And I think that's something that we are missing, to my earlier point around this kind of fear mongering around so-called culture wars. Understandably, leaders are operating in this uncertain landscape and there is some risk involved. But the way that my colleague and friend Rima Mitra, whom I'm interviewed in the book, said, if you are not taking risks, you're not doing your job as a marketer. It's just that we have to take smart risks that are rooted in data, in knowledge, in thoughtfulness. And it seems that, the brands that have that courage to go and do something are the ones that are going to go ahead. A case in point, one of the favorite examples that I have right now is Lyft's new Women Plus initiative. So it's basically part of the app where if you're taking the ride, you can opt in and essentially select to be paired with a female or a non-binary driver whenever you can. And so when I come home in the last few trips that I've taken, Lyft from the airport, I get paired with a female driver. I really enjoy it. And like watching my own reactions as a consumer, I feel very connected to the brand that really understands, it's not just going around with a megaphone talking about gender equality and women's rights, but it's really understanding my day-to-day concerns as a woman in the world and what it means to take the ride from the airport. And my friend, CMO advisor Lola Bakare, I believe, just reposted a screenshot of Uber, who is now sending out a survey to their customers asking whether this feature would be desirable, and would be of interest. And so you see a little bit of a different kind of energy where a brand is, kind of asking for opinion, whether that's something that customer wants, which is certainly probably better than not doing anything. And then you see somebody like Lyft that is actually going out there with this initiative and very confidently putting it out there. And, the result is I used to take Uber all the time, and now I'm clicking my pink icon on my phone whenever I need a ride, and I'm taking Lyft. And that's the power of understanding the consumer and cultural issues at hand and really tapping into them with bravery.
Well, I tell you, anyone who reads this book, Cultural Intelligence for Marketers, is going to gain incredible insights. It's just amazing, the simplicity behind some of this and the massive impact that it can make. Anastasia, thank you so much for the incredible insights today. Anastasia, you've just been absolutely incredible, absolutely amazing. What is the best way for our audience to get in contact with you?
Well, first of all, Lori, thank you for your time and for your listeners' time. This was just a huge pleasure. Love talking about this and just so happy to be here. I try to curate some of these conversations online so folks can find me on LinkedIn, where I try to start these conversations and, think together about how can we innovate and move forward in ways that respond to the current moment. And so my DMs are always open and would love to hear from anybody who has any thoughts, ideas, provocations, counter arguments. All of that is welcome and would love to continue this conversation.
And I think you just started one of those on LinkedIn this morning, by the way.
Yes.
To you on that. For those of you who'd like to reach out to me, please email me, Lori, L-O-R-I, at StrategyCast.com. And don't forget to sign up for the StrategyCast newsletter at StrategyCast.com as well. Thank you so much for your appearance on StrategyCast.
Thanks for having me, Lori. And I wouldn't be a marketer if I didn't add that if your listeners want to find out more about the book, they can go to culturalintelligenceformarketers.com. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.